What's up, everybody, and welcome to Season 2 of Let's Talk About It. Today's episode is going to be the perfect launch of this season as we sit down with Tyler Burns, president of the Witness, a Black Christian collective, pastor of New Dimensions Christian Center Pensacola, and host of Pass the Mic podcast. I truly believe this conversation is going to encourage you, is going to challenge you, is going to grow you as a believer, as someone who is wanting and desiring to see God's kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. So sit back and enjoy this conversation. Let's talk about it.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to Let's Talk About It. We are here for another episode. My name is Kēvin Carly. I am the youth director here at Infocus Church. I'm joined by Caleb Gerard. Man, sometimes I forget your title. My bad.
I'm the worship and creative arts director.
There we go.
And we're in the same room. So if we're like looking to the side, it's because we're like looking at each other.
It doesn't look like it, but that's the creativity.
I'm jealous, man. Y'all are in the same room. I'm jealous.
Yeah. Hey, we can link up sometime. We can. So we are joined by a special guest who has been a integral part of our growth as we've been listening to his many works, the way that he uses his voice to speak for God's glory and the good of the church as we pursue this racial reconciliation and racial social justice in honor of God and the vision that he has for his people called the church. And so we have our man, Tyler Burns, joining us. Tyler, say what's up to the people.
What's going on, y'all? Thank y'all for having me here.
No problem. So Tyler, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Kind of a brief introduction, who you are, kind of the different roles. I know you wear several different hats. So could you just tell the people a little bit about yourself?
Sure, man. Yeah. So born and raised in the Florida Panhandle. I currently pastor a church in Florida called New Dimensions Christian Center. It's right on the tip of the Panhandle in Pensacola. I'm married with 2 kids. My beautiful wife, Marlena, and I have been married 6 years. 3-year-old daughter named Trinity Zora, and a 1-year-old son named Benaiah Langston. So as you can tell, we keep it biblical and Black. That's how we do it. First name biblical, second name Black. And I also run an organization, which, is where you probably have interacted with me. Most people have interacted with me through an organization called The Witness. We're a Black Christian collective that seeks to encourage, empower, and educate Black Christians to be free in our souls and our bodies, and host a podcast there called Pass the Mic. So that's kind of like a Cliff Notes version of where I'm at and what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know that's where I found you at, where, man, that Pass the Mic podcast, as well as the Witness, man, just reading the material on the website, listening to the podcast. It's been an encouragement for me. One, seeing people who look like me speaking to the faith in a way that is biblical, but that also is firm and saying, listen, we're unapologetically Black, and we're not going to run from that. We're not going to hide it. And in fact, we're going to consider the contextualization that scriptural application applies for us and how we navigate our life within this country and in this world. And it's been huge for me. It's been huge. So I appreciate you. And anyone who is not familiar with those resources, can we put that in the show notes?
Yeah. We'll have it. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be in the description. If you're listening through the podcast, it'll also be in the description. If you've downloaded it illegally from Napster,
oh my God,
you don't get it.
Is Napster still a thing?
No, it's not.
Man, LimeWire, man, you going back. Sheesh.
Yeah, taking it way back. But no, actually, Kēvin, what you're talking about is really what we desire to do. What we like to say internally is that we want to do the hard work of proclaiming and reclaiming, proclaiming the truth of Jesus and reclaiming the lost and stolen parts of our Black identities. So we proclaim and reclaim, and we can do both at the same time, which is what a lot of people, the conversation around Black Christians and Black theology and what have you, is often shaped by the reality that most people do not think we can do both, that we can proclaim and reclaim, and that both are holy work and both can be gospel work. We believe that they can.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of bad interpretations of Ephesians, that there's no more Jew and Gentile. So there's no black and white. And so we should just be colorblind. But I like how Pastor Tony Evans, he taught on it, saying, if that was Paul's intention to separate those identities, then why would he continue in his future writings to refer to them as Jew and Gentile? It doesn't make sense. And so our cultural identities are something to be embraced and celebrated. And that's what heaven's going to look like as we see in Revelation. And man, that's great. I love it. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And I think, also, I think it's important to understand what this says. What are we saying about the character of God? What we're saying about the character of God is that God is so intentional that he sends Jesus to wrap himself up in human flesh, the incarnation, and live amongst us for the purpose of redemption, but that God was incidental in his creation of humankind. So God is intentional or God is incidental. Which one? Because if God is intentional, what you're saying is God is intentional about all things. And then we can get into, a lot of people believe very strongly in the sovereignty of God, right? Which God is above all, but is in all. And so which one, you got to pick a struggle, right?
Right.
So if you're saying everything is, if you're saying God's character is incidental first, then that attribute seeps into all of what God does. You cannot just isolate it in the context of race and ethnicity. But if you're saying God is intentional, that also seeps into all of what God does, which includes the creation of human beings in his image. And if it's created in his image, male and female, he created them. Then that also means that he's intentionally creating us and what we look like. So
that's basic theology, man. And it's so funny how our theology will have incontinuities like that. Like, I believe God is intentional, but I believe that, we should be colorblind. Well, why would he give us color? Why would he make us the way that we are if that's the case? Man, that's brilliant. That's great. That's great.
I know we kind of jumped into the conversation.
We did.
You alley-ooped me. You gave me an alley-oop, man. So I had to take it.
Take it. So today we are talking about centering Black voices. Yeah. And Caleb, you just jump in, man. I don't want to steal the show. But talking about,
tell me why would I be jumping into a conversation on centering Black voices when you're telling?
But I don't want you to be sitting back just looking.
No, I'm just messing with you. I got you.
So for those who aren't familiar with Tyler Burns or the Witness or the Pastor Mike podcast, on some of your episodes, you have referenced kind of your life story. And I know we don't have unlimited time today, but in particular, what I wanted to make sure that our listeners heard, at the least, is kind of your story about your experiences at Liberty University, and because I felt like that really encapsulated your I guess introduction into the arena of discovering Black voices and why that's important, and why recognition of the lack of Black voices at Christian bookstores or on airwaves, et cetera, why that's a problem. So can you kind of speak to that and as to how you came to realize that the world around you did not center Black voices and why that's a problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it actually starts, Liberty is kind of a climax of this in 2008 in the Obama presidential election, first Obama election for me. But it started long before that. So what I hope people understand through the episodes and through the telling of my life story is that I'm a pastor's kid, son of a second generation Pentecostal preacher, and our church was a Black church growing up, but there was also an emphasis and a heavy multicultural presence even within our Black church. So stylistically, it was very Black. There was also very multicultural at one point, 4,000 members or so, 60% Black, 40% white, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And so again, that's a very multicultural, church, even though it's Black centered, right? It was very Black in its styles and worship and all kinds of ministries. But so I'm in that environment, again, Black church, son of a Black pastor growing up in a Black family. But then my education is in an independent fundamental Baptist school. And this is pre-Liberty. And so there's the central flagship IFB school nationwide and worldwide is in Pensacola. It was founded there. And so for 13 years of my schooling, my education, I was in that environment. And then for 2 years of college before I transferred to Liberty. So growing up in that environment, I had theological and identity cultural confusion because, again, I'm getting a very Black presentation on Sunday and Wednesday night, but a very whitewashed, white-centered presentation Monday through Friday. And so from 9 to 5, I was hearing conceptions about God and theology and education and culture. But it was, again, Blackness was incidental. And also Blackness was also seen and perceived as threats, right? Mm-hmm. So you would hear history and read history, be taught history, and you would not see any Black faces or voices making substantive contributions unless they were reinforcing the white status quo. So we would get 2 to 3 pages on Booker T. Washington because he was, according to them, a respectable, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, emphasizer of personal responsibility. We get George Washington Carver because he overcame his situation, right?
Yeah.
We get a little bit of Rosa Parks, more Rosa Parks than Dr. King, because Rosa Parks started the civil rights movement, and in their mind, and according to them, you hear nothing about the civil rights movement after Dr. King is killed because Rosa Parks started it, Dr. King ended it. Now we're equal. Yeah. Right. So this is the perception. And so that's just in one setting and scenario, but we can get into biblical interpretation. We can get into English, we can get into literature. And so all of this was very whitewashed and white-centered. So I grew up thinking that the conversations and the contributions of my people weren't worthy of being studied. And so even though that wasn't the explicit message, it was the implicit message by who was centered and who was talked about and who we learned from. Yeah. And so that kind of leads us to the 2008 Obama election, in which, again, me being at that time extremely conservative politically and socially, I thought, hey, of course, the school is right in how it perceives this particular election. Yeah. And then the night of, we were watching, obviously, Fox News being, beamed onto this huge telestrator. Yeah. And, when they announced President Obama had won and made history, all the white students were sitting up in the kind of the bowl in the stadium with their arms folded, sulking. And all the Black students went down into the floor and were celebrating. And I saw then the stark cultural divide. Why is it that I'm not celebrating with my people? What is it about what my people, the joy they're experiencing, that I feel like it is not just something I don't want to participate in, but also theologically incorrect, morally, ethically wrong. Yeah. Which is the difference. We can celebrate whatever. You can look at it and say, oh, it's incidental. But when someone says that support of a particular president or candidate or line of theological thought of someone who looks like me is morally and ethically wrong, now we're having a different conversation. We're having a conversation about the fundamentals of how we approach and construct our faith. And so Liberty was kind of the climax of that. And I mean, there are other things, we can get into how many Black professors are at Liberty, which there are very, very few. We can get into how many Black teachers I had in all of my schooling years at this independent fundamental Baptist schooling, which was one in 15 years. We can get into all of that, right? Why is it that it's so conspicuous that we're not presented, that we're not seen? And I think it's deeper than, it's just the way that it's always been or the way that it is. I think it's more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super challenging, super heavy. I'd love to hear a little bit about you mentioned in some of your podcasts and even sermons about a conversation you had with your aunt when you came home from Liberty, and kind of how that stuck with you. Can you share a little bit about that conversation, if that's all right?
And I just want to say again real quick, like, these are our brief recaps. Please go subscribe, go back and listen to the interviews and the videos so that you can actually hear the full story, because this is a Cliff Notes version. Yeah. But man, it's great. Go ahead.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for that plug. I appreciate it. My team gonna appreciate it too. They're like, you did it.
We got
Because
you.
I don't self promote. So they're going to be like, they'll be like, you should talk more about the podcast. But yeah, so I had this conversation at a family reunion with, it wasn't even an intentional conversation. It was more incidental, but we were gathered around the kitchen island at a family reunion over 13 years ago. And I remember that it was a very significant moment for our family. My great grandfather was there. He was at the time 103 years old.
Wow.
So the merging of legacy was palpable. There was a 103-year-old grandfather there, and then great grandfather, and then my sister at the time, I think, was somewhere around 13 or something like that. So, you see the stark differences in age, and so it was a very holy time. It was a powerful time. And, they had been out at the pool and were laughing and joking, and we were eating. And, my auntie Violet, she says, hey, she's essentially the matriarch of our family. She says, hey, nephew, tell me something. What is this schooling, this Christian schooling that you're receiving? What do they think about Black people? And everything gets really quiet. People, it's like a movie. People looking at me, looking at her, like what's about to happen.
Yeah.
And she knows me. I was, very confident and, very outspoken when pressed about things I was passionate about. And so I gave some half-hearted perspective answer, which essentially was racism is a sin problem, not a skin problem. I don't remember what I said. It was nonsense.
Yeah.
And then she started to press me Socratic method style. I don't know if that's really what she was intending, but she started to ask me further questions about, well, what does this mean for us? Because our experience is different from theirs. So explain to me, why is it that it seems like they talk about obeying the authorities when we don't receive justice? What do they think about economics? What do they think about the least of these? What do they think about healthcare? They want to take away our healthcare. They want to add more healthcare to us. Explain this to me. What theologically are they teaching you about our experience? And she asked questions, and to be clear, I tried to construct an answer which established what I thought was a hierarchy of morality. But I could not answer her specific questions. I had no answers for what our schooling environment, what our construction of theology in the education space taught about those things. I didn't have an answer for her. And so the last 13 years or so have been essentially a search for better answers from better sources. I want to be able to answer people better about what the Bible says and what our people think by centering our voices on questions and concerns that most affect us. So that was my auntie, as always. Black women will get you together, and so she took care of that and poked a lot of holes that have led me to go and try to find better answers for these questions.
That's great.
Wow. Kēvin, you wanna lead into that next question, kind of like what the whole idea of it is?
Yeah. So when we talk about centering Black voices, like I think, anyone can get some context clues based on everything that you just described. But could you kind of give your clear-cut definition of what you mean by centering Black voices?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think it's great we need to be clear on our definitions, and we need to be clear on what we mean. So I'll give kind of a broader definition, but before I get into that, I think it presupposes a couple of things, right? So when we say we want to center Black voices, that means, first of all, that Black voices are on the margins, right? So there's a question, there's a word that we use often. I prefer, and this is just me, because it kind of leads into kind of better rhetoric, but I prefer to use the term marginalized peoples. And these are people who have been pushed away from the center of a conversation and away from the center of society, because the society has been constructed for those people who are in power and the status quo, but not for the marginalized. It has not, the laws and the history has not been constructed with us in mind. So we are marginal to the histories of the world. That's why someone like someone recently said, an elected official can say, or a former elected official can say, well, we built this country, white elected official, right? We built this country. And it's like,
yeah,
not really. I know you
out of where there was nothing before.
Yeah.
Ex nihilo. It just came up. And we were like, well, no, there were people here, enslaved Africans kind of pushed a lot of the industry on the plantation with cotton.
Right.
We built the White House. Native Americans were already here. There was just a systemic elimination of them. There was genocide. I mean, I wouldn't say you just built the country, right? But that's the narrative, right? So the narrative is we built the country. And so the people who are on the margins are hidden in plain sight. We can point to our contributions. We can point to our inventions. We can point to our presence, but we're hidden in plain sight. Right?
Wow. It's like the proverb I've heard. I'm probably not quoting it correctly, but it's like, until the lion learns to write, the hunter will always be the king of the forest, or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
History is told by the winners. And so when you know that everyone, whenever you tell a history, you are telling it from your perspective, right? That is just human nature. All of it, right? Our oral history in the Black community is told from our perspective. And so that is just what is going to happen.
I'm reminded of Brian Stevenson has a quote where he talks about when he's speaking on the Civil War, he says, the North won the battle, but the South won the war, the narrative. And the narrative of the South is what has remained. And I think that's somewhat because the narrative of the South that's perceived as Black inferiority was still like deeply seeped into the North anyways. But that narrative has risen through, and it's what you're talking about. It has led to the continued marginalization. That narrative, what Baldwin and now Eddie Glaude describe as the lie. That's kind of their thing for it. But I'll let you keep going on what you mean by centering Black voices.
No, you're completely right. Like Brian Stevenson calls it the narrative of racial difference, right?
Yeah.
The narrative of racial difference means that there's a difference in the superiority and inferiority of races. And so ethnically, white is seen as more pure. It is seen as more beautiful. It is a narrative that seeps into all of life. And, Baldwin and Eddie Glaude, as you mentioned, Eddie Glaude in his book, Begin Again, calls it the lie, right? So Baldwin confronts America's lie. He says that the job of the witness is to tell the truth. So he's not speaking about our organization, just in general, the idea of the witness. The job of the witness is to tell the truth, right? To tell the story and to confront what he calls all the idols and the shibboleths that our culture holds dear. So that's important, right? So again, This is important for the framing, because I can't just say center Black voices in a long form interview and you not understand the framing of where I'm coming from. And so if people reject that and push back against that, I'd say, okay, that's fine. No problems. How many Black professors and teachers do you have to graduate? How many are you having before you graduate? Any?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. How much of Black literature do you have to interact with and engage with to actually get an English degree or to actually graduate from high school? How many Black voices are you substantively learning from rather than just bringing up to critique? Who wrote your history textbooks?
Yeah.
Who wrote all the textbooks that you read and deal with? Who wrote them?
Wow.
Right, so we're asking these questions because, again, we're marginalized. It's not to say that there's none present. There's some present.
All right.
But is it essential? Or is the understanding and depth of Black communities and Black history essential and required for you to be able to pass on, to say you understand the country and the world, right? So we've been pushed on margins of society in 2 areas. Number one, in overall history, society, life, because the world has not been constructed with us in mind, right? The country wasn't constructed with us in mind. Check the original founding documents. Freedom was for white men, right? So anyway, there's a lot that we could go into there. Read Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. He breaks all that down. But
Mr. Blue Check verified himself.
Mr. Blue Check verified himself. Yeah, that's my guy, my co-host. But then also, and this is what's important about centering Black voices, and primarily what I mean, which is that conversations about Black interests and Black community are often had without our voices being considered essential to have the conversation.
Say that.
So here's what happens. Our denominations in churches will have conversations about Black Lives Matter without bringing Black voices to the table to learn from them about what Black Lives Matter actually means.
Yeah.
Right? So again, we'll talk about people, not to them, not with them, and not sit under their leadership. So it's okay to talk about them, but it's not okay to center their voices in the conversation, in conversations that concern their identity. Let me give you a biblical example, because I believe Jesus is the model and the example of what it means to center marginalized people. John 9, okay? The disciples passed by the blind man who's begging. They said, "Now, Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, notice the disciples passed by a person in pain, in proximity to Jesus as healer, and talk about him, not to him.
Wow.
Hey, Jesus, which one of these, what happened? So tell me what happened. Did his parents sin? They probably really sinned. Or he was probably a real bad sinner. And Jesus turns around and looks up like,
oh, man.
Nobody sinned. This is for the glory of God. And then what does he do? He comes down and puts the mud on his eyes and said, "Go wash in the pool of soap." So he turns the conversation from about the blind man to the blind man.
Wow.
Love it.
So he turns the conversation from about him to him. That's what I mean by center. So don't talk about us if you won't learn from us. Don't talk about us if you won't talk to us. That's anti-gospel. Another example, right? Luke 8. The woman with the issue of blood, or as I like to call it, the woman with the issue. Because you could just fill in the blank. We don't like people with issues.
Yeah.
So what has happened? She's been bleeding for 12 years. She says, if I can but touch the hem of his garment. Oh, Black church. You want to talk about Black church? We'll preach the mess out of this. If I can just but touch the hem of his garment. Oh man, we'll be running around the church. Now what happens? Jesus turns around and says, "Who touched me?" Where's Jesus going? To a nobleman's daughter's house to heal her. Jairus' daughter's house to heal her. A 12-year-old. Jesus is going to meet someone who is high in the status quo and the crowd is following him. Jesus stops and says, "Wait a minute, who touched me?" And it's interesting, I believe in the Mark passage of this text, Jesus turns around, approaches her, and she tells him what happened. So Jesus pauses a movement towards people who society says should be at the center, to look at the woman who is in pain, to look at the woman who has been bleeding for 12 years, to say, "Talk to me." And he sat and listened while she told him everything.
So good.
So Jesus stops and listens to the woman when he's got things to do. And all you can do is tweet about us. All you can do is talk about us. All you can do is blog about us. All you can do is dismiss us. Oh, well, yeah, I saw what was on the Black Lives Matter website. So it's a no for me. When you have no proximity to us,
wow,
how dismissive that you can now enter into a conversation when you haven't spent a day in our shoes, when you haven't experienced all of the lived experience that we have, positive and negative, and then tell us what we should think about us. No, center Black voices. You are marginalizing us by talking about us. And that's what it means to center Black voices.
So good, man. That's so good.
Y'all got me preaching. So I'm just,
hey, you are, man.
I'm gonna rein it back.
No, keep going. Man, we've been in plenty of conversations, just like that. Insistence, man. What the church should really be focusing on in the Black community is XYZ. It's like you don't know anything about the Black experience. You're not Black yourself. And even in an effort to give benefit of the doubt and say, man, I'm trusting and hoping that your intentions are good in the suggestions that you're making, but you're out of pocket. You're out of pocket. That's just it.
Yeah, man. I think even also, I think people need to be challenged. And I'm a pastor, so my responses to these things will always be pastoral first, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in your heart that makes you think you have the justification to dismiss an entire people's experience? What's going on in your heart? Are you okay?
Yeah.
You think that now your belief in Jesus gives you a fundamental right to lord authority where God hadn't given it to you?
Mm.
That's a soul issue. So when I deal with people, I'm like, oh, it's a stronghold. Repent.
Yeah.
People are like, oh man, let's give them facts and read these 10 books. I'm like, whoa. I'm not casting pearls before swine here.
Yeah.
I'm not going to throw jewels in the mud.
Yeah.
Are you fertile ground? I'm not going to cast seed on stony ground. Are you fertile ground to listen and hear? What is the condition of your soul? And so we're trying to convince people. And the question more so is not whether or not they would agree with our facts. All the facts in the world can't soften a hardened heart. So let me ask you a question. What do you really think about us? Man, let me ask you some more questions. Who are the people who hurt you? And it always comes out in all of these conversations. Oh, well, this Black person said this one day, and this Black person did this, and I've been treated bad, and they pushed me one time in high school and all this. And I'm like, okay, so now because of one experience you've had, now you speak about the whole of our community?
Mm.
Get the seed of bitterness out your heart. Then approach the conversation. You're not ready to have the conversation. Your soul isn't healthy enough. Your heart is too hard. That's why we don't have conversations with every person. Man. I hate to say it. We do not have conversations with every person. Let's pray. I'm praying for you, but I cannot have a conversation with you because you're not ready. And so if I want to talk to a wall, I can talk to a wall. But I think the only person that can soften a hardened heart, that can break up fallow ground, is the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tyler, for everything that you had to share, everything you had to say. All of his social media links are listed in the description of this video, as well as links to his podcast, The Witness, and the infamous conversation with his auntie, and the conversation surrounding his experiences at Liberty. You can find all that in the description of this episode. Be back here next Friday as we're releasing part 2 of this conversation. And trust me, it's just as good as part 1. Don't miss it. We'll see you then. Thanks for watching.